Sophie just had the best meal of her life. A steakhouse in Manhattan. The food was incredible, the service was perfect, the waiter smiled the entire time and refilled her water glass 11 times without being asked. Then, the bill arrived. The meal cost $235, and at the bottom, in bold letters, 3 suggested tip amounts: 18%, 20%, and 25%. Sophie did the math. The lowest option was $42. $42 just to say thank you. Back home in England, Sophie has literally never paid 42 pounds for an entire meal, let alone as a bonus on top of one. She looked at her American friend Tyler across the table. He was already pulling out his card. "I'll get the tip," he said casually. 20%, right? Sophie stared at him like he'd just volunteered to set fire to his own wallet. And this is the moment we need to talk about tipping. If you're British, Australian, or from basically anywhere in Europe, American tipping makes absolutely no sense. So let's start from the beginning. In the United States, tipping is not optional. It's technically voluntary, but socially, it is as mandatory as breathing. If you eat at a sit-down restaurant in America and don't leave a tip, you haven't made a statement, you've committed a crime against an unwritten social contract. The standard tip in an American restaurant is 15 to 20% of the total bill. 20% has become the new baseline. Some people tip 25%. Some people tip 30%. The suggested amounts on the payment screen keep creeping upward, and this is not an accident. But here's where it gets interesting. Tipping in America isn't just about restaurants anymore. Americans are now expected to tip at coffee shops, hair salons, hotels, food delivery, ride shares, tattoo parlors, dog groomers, and in some cases, self-checkout machines. Yes, self-checkout machines, where you do all the work yourself, and then a screen asks you to tip. A 2023 Pew Research study found that 72% of Americans say they're being asked to tip in more places than just 5 years ago. And here's the number that should stop you. Only 34% of Americans say they even know when they're supposed to tip. 2/3 of the country is confused by their own system. But why does this system exist in the first place? That's where it gets dark. In the United States, the federal tipped minimum wage is $2.13 an hour. Let me say that again. $2.13 per hour. That's not a typo. That is the legal minimum that American restaurants are required to pay their servers. The idea is that tips will make up the difference between $2.13 and the full minimum wage. If they don't, the employer is technically supposed to cover the gap. In practice, this rarely gets enforced. So, when Tyler tips his waiter 20%, he isn't just being generous. He is literally paying that person's salary. The restaurant isn't, the customer is. In the United Kingdom, the national minimum wage as of 2024 is £11.44 per hour for anyone 21 and over. Every server, every barista, every bartender gets this as a baseline. Tips in Britain are a bonus, a nice extra, not a survival mechanism. This is the fundamental difference that makes the two systems impossible to compare. In America, tips are wages. In Britain, tips are gratitude. Sophie didn't know this when she saw that $42 suggested tip. She just thought Americans were insane. And honestly, a lot of Americans are starting to agree with her. Here's where the psychology gets fascinating. Researchers at Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business studied why people actually tip. They found 2 primary motivations. The first is reciprocity. We naturally want to reward someone who served us well. Humans are on some level hardwired for this. But the second motivation is far more powerful and far more uncomfortable. It's conformity to social norms. The Dartmouth researchers found that the social pressure to tip is so strong that it overrides almost everything else. Even when service is bad, people still tip close to the standard percentage because the psychological cost of breaking the norm feels worse than the financial cost of the tip itself. Think about that. You're not tipping because the service was good. You're tipping because you're afraid of what it says about you if you don't. And this is where the tipping screen comes in. You've seen it. You order a coffee, nothing fancy. The barista turns the tablet around. 3 options stare at you. 18%, 22%, and 25%. There is a no tip button, but it's small, and the barista is watching. The Pew study found that about half of Americans say those preset tip options on screens are a bad thing. But they still tip anyway because the screen creates what psychologists call a public compliance moment. Your choice is visible, the pressure is immediate, and your brain calculates that $3 extra is a small price to pay to avoid feeling like a terrible person. This is not generosity. This is guilt architecture, and American businesses have gotten extremely good at building it. Now, let's flip it. Tyler goes to a restaurant in London. The food is great, the service is solid, a little more reserved than what he's used to, but the waiter was attentive and professional. The bill comes. Tyler looks for the tip line. There isn't one. He looks for the suggested percentages. Nothing. Just the total. Just the food. Tyler feels physically uncomfortable. His entire adult life, he has been conditioned to add 20% to every bill. Not doing it feels like stealing, like walking out without paying. He flags down the waiter. "Hey, sorry, how do I add the tip?" The waiter looks mildly confused and says, "Oh, you don't have to. Service is included." Tyler still leaves 20 pounds on the table. The waiter looks at it, looks at Tyler, picks it up, a bit surprised, says cheers with a tone that suggests Tyler has just done something unusual but pleasant, like finding a tenner on the street. Here's what's happening psychologically. Tyler's tipping behavior is what researchers call an overlearned response. It's a habit so deeply ingrained that it triggers anxiety when it can't be performed. His brain has filed not tipping in the same category as doing something wrong. The social norm isn't just in his culture anymore, it's in his nervous system. Meanwhile, in Britain, the social norm around tipping is almost the exact opposite. If you leave a large tip in a British restaurant, you might actually make the staff slightly uncomfortable. It can feel like you're showing off, or worse, like you're implying their base wage isn't enough, which in Britain it is. A 10% tip or rounding up the bill is considered generous. Anything beyond that enters the territory of, "Are you all right?" The British approach to tipping reflects something deeper about how the two countries view the relationship between business, worker, and customer. In America, the tipping system is built on an individualist philosophy. The customer decides what the worker is worth. Good service gets rewarded. Bad service gets punished. It sounds fair on paper, but in practice, research shows that tip amounts correlate far more with the customer's mood, the server's appearance, and even their race than with the actual quality of service. Britain operates on a more collectivist assumption. The employer pays the worker. The customer pays the business. The transaction is clean. Nobody's livelihood depends on whether a stranger is having a good day. This isn't because British people are less generous, it's because the British system doesn't require generosity to function. The American system does, and that's a critical difference. There's also a class dimension. In Britain, tipping has historical roots as an upper-class gesture, almost patronizing by nature. The word tip itself may have originated in British coffee houses where wealthy patrons would leave extra coins. But modern British culture has moved away from this, seeing a fair wage as more dignified than relying on the goodwill of strangers. America kept the tradition and built an entire industry around it. Something has shifted in America, and it happened fast. Before the pandemic, tipping was mostly confined to restaurants, taxis, and maybe your hairdresser. Then COVID hit. Businesses started adding digital tip screens as a way to support workers during lockdowns. People were generous. They tipped more and more widely. But then the lockdowns ended. The screens didn't go away. They multiplied. Now, Americans are being asked to tip at self-service kiosks, drive-through windows, and even the auto repair shop. The percentage options on the screen keep climbing. What used to start at 15% now starts at 18 or 20%. The custom tip button gets harder to find with every software update. And Americans have finally hit their breaking point. Pew Research found that about half of U.S. adults now say tipping culture is a problem. Nearly 9 in 10 Americans say tipping expectations have gone too far. That's not a small shift. That is an entire country collectively saying enough.
The average tip in American restaurants has actually started dropping, falling to 19.3% in 2024, according to restaurant payment platform Toast. That might sound like a tiny dip, but in a culture where 20% has been gospel for years, it's a tectonic shift. American tipping culture might be the one area where the U.S. is slowly, reluctantly, painfully starting to move in Britain's direction. Here's what nobody on either side of the Atlantic wants to admit. The American tipping system was never really designed to help workers. It was designed to help businesses. By shifting the responsibility of paying wages from the employer to the customer, American restaurants get to charge lower menu prices, report higher margins, and let their staff absorb the risk. When the restaurant is slow on a Tuesday night, the owner's costs don't change, but the server goes home with almost nothing. The person who benefits most from American tipping culture isn't the waiter, and it definitely isn't the customer. It's the business owner who figured out how to make you pay their employees for them, and then convinced everyone it was about generosity. Sophie understood this instinctively. Tyler is just starting to. So here's the question. If you could redesign the entire system from scratch, would you pick the American model or the British model? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you're American, tell us honestly, what's the weirdest place you've been asked to tip? If you missed our last video on 5 things Americans do that British people find genuinely rude and the psychology behind each one, it's linked right here. That one started some serious debates. Subscribe to Across the Pond so you don't miss what's coming next. See you in the next one.